To demonstrate sewing on recessed cords, I'm going to use a text block of 16 sections and 4 sheets per section. The paper's nothing really special, it's photocopying paper. I'm going to mark 3mm trim marks at the head and tail, and then the kettle stitches 12mm in from the trim marks. I'm going to sew onto 4 cords, so I'll divide between the kettle stitches by 5 to get the 4 cord locations. I'll discuss the number of cords and the cord locations and hollow back books in general a bit later during one of the tedious sewing periods. But now I'm going to move on to cutting in the kettle stitches first. My goal is to just touch the inside fold of the section. I use my fingers to guide the saw, and I also squeeze together the back of the sections to compress them and make them cut more like wood. I'll undercut the cord locations so there's more space for the cord to fit into the hole. Here's the shape I'm aiming for, but I'm not after a big slot on the inside section. So those undercuts I really don't want to go through into the inside section. I'm going to pull 2 strands out of a 6-ply hemp cord that I bought from Hewitt's. From experience, I know 3 strands is too thick for this book, and as you can see here, it fits quite well, the 2 strands. The saw I'm using is a woodworking gents saw, Lynx. It wasn't super expensive. It's 20 TPI teeth per inch, and I did absolutely nothing to it. I just bought it and used it. So I'll separate out 4 new cords and retwist the 2 strands before putting them on the sewing frame. The loop on the crossbar are called lay cords. The cords that we'll be sewing onto, which attach the boards, are called slips. This is how I attach cords to keys. I put the cord through the hole and then wrap the cord around that piece of cord going through the hole to lock it in place, come back up through the legs and put the legs away from me. I attached to the lay cord with just simple overhead knot. The books show a more sophisticated knot, but I've never quite worked out how to use it and keep the tension on the cords. I suspect you're supposed to do up the knot on the cord first, then attach the key. In a moment I'm going to demonstrate what to do if your key doesn't have a large hole in it. You just lay the cord against the key, wrap it around, lock it, and then up through the legs. That works fine, but I think it is less likely to slip if you've got the hole and you go through the hole. I'll sew using 25/3 linen thread, and I'll give it a quick wax, mainly to take any twists out of the thread rather than for the wax, since this thread is already lightly waxed. I'll sew on end papers later, so I'll leave about 2 lengths of the book free. Sewing on recess cords is fairly straightforward. The main things to look out for is to absolutely not to pierce the cords with the needle. You don't want the thread going through the cords. With practice you develop little tricks to avoid piercing the cord. You sort of run the needle down the cord and you aim in and up. If you do go through the cord, you just have to pull it back out and start again. It's not a big deal, it just takes a bit of time. The first cord is the easiest because you can just move the section from side to side to avoid the cord. I find sewing in the direction that's moving away from me the hardest, because pushing the needle from the inside you have to aim it back towards you, and it's harder to find the hole and miss the cord. As usual, the first 2 sections are joined with the reef knot. You have to get the tension right pretty much after each cord, and that pulls the cord into the holes in the back of the section. And it's best to keep the swell under control as you're going along, and that also pushes the sections down on the chords. Now let's get back to the number and spacing of the chords. So in the 19th century, the hollow back leather binding was the most common English binding. This allowed for a smooth spine and took the stress off the spine leather, allowing the finishers to fill their boots and cover everything with gold. At the same time, binders were trying to get their costs down, and reducing the time on a binding, such as on the sewing, increased their profits. Well, okay, kept them afloat. So reducing the sewing to 3, maybe even 2 chords was common. And this was hidden, of course, because they had the false raised bands on the hollow tube. At this time, also the use of the very thin calf became very common, and thus it was also really hard to hide any of the telltale little bumps from the sewing. So if you wanted to make it look like that you really had raised bands, then you needed to put the sunken chords where the false raised bands were going to be. So your decision on how many and where to place the chords sort of comes down to aesthetics and how strong you want the binding to be. Now if you want, so you're worried about aesthetics, then you want to put the chords where the false raised bands are going to be, and chances are you're going to space the false raised bands the same as if you're sewing on chords. So you'll make the lower panels slightly larger than all the other panels, and if you're going to put the sunken chords in the same locations, then you would do the same spacing for the sunken chords or the recessed chords. Now to interrupt my thought on the number and spacing of the chords, I took this camera angle just to show how I run the thread around a finger when I'm pulling it through to stop it cutting through the back of the sections. You'll see it just now. I'll keep my thumb there and run the cord around it as I pull the thread through. Now back to the chord locations. So let's say you've decided that you want to put the chords in the location of where the false raised bands are going to be, but you don't want to do, you're going to put 5 false raised bands on the spine, but you don't want to sew on 5 recessed chords. So you could mark out for 5 and then just sew in 3 or 4. Or if you're using a thicker leather and you think that you can, the bumps aren't going to be very obvious, then you can put the recessed chords wherever you like. And in this example, that's what I've done. I've decided to sew on 4 chords, so it's still very strong, not the 5 raised bands that I'm going to put on the spine when I'm finished. And I don't want to space them at the false raised band location, so I'm just going to evenly space them between the kettle stitches. So I measured the distance between the kettle stitches, divided by 5 to get the 4 locations. Now I'm going to attach the end papers and make a little template to transfer the hole locations. They're just ordinary made end papers, so I'll put the holes in the whites behind the colours, and I'll punch those through just the white side of the crease so that I don't punch it through the coloured sheet, which does mean that you have to, when you do the sewing, the end paper needs to be able to move forward a fraction of a millimetre, just so that doesn't stick out beyond the spine, because the cords have to go over that folded colour which isn't sawn in. I'll continue to check that the end paper will move forward enough that I can tip it on and not have it protrude beyond the spine. And the final step is to tip on the first and last section and the end papers.